From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson with you. And ahead today, K-State's Glynn Tonsor on the cattle markets. He'll size up the USDA's latest cattle on feed report, and he'll summarize his comments presented at the USDA's Agricultural Outlook Forum last Friday on proposals to create more transparency in the cattle markets. Also today, K-State's Drew Ricketts will talk with K-State's Jaymelynn Farney about coyote control around spring-calving cow herds. He'll discuss the nature of coyote predatory behavior and how that affects a producer's efforts to prevent calf losses to predation. Standing by as well, Jeff Wickman with this week's 4-H segment. He'll visit with K-State's Beth Hinshaw about local 4-H Day activities. All this and more next on Agriculture Today.
A social distancing tip.
While the CDC urges you to avoid close contact, like hugging or shaking hands, there are other non-physical ways to say hello. Wave, wink, use sign language, salute, smile, give the peace sign, throw up an air high five, do jazz hands. Remember, stay a minimum of 6 feet or 2 arms length away from others, and stay home if you can. For more info, visit coronavirus.gov.
Let's all do our part, because we're all #alone together. Brought to you by the Ad Council.
You're tuned in to Agriculture Today from the campus of Kansas State University. And Glynn Tonsor joins us once more for the cattle market segment. Glynn, as you know, is a livestock economist with K-State Research and Extension. He, in fact, was one of the presenters at that USDA Agricultural Outlook Forum, and will tell you what the topic of choice was in that presentation here a little later on. Looking back on the cattle market trends from this past week, Glynn, the weather was influential here, wasn't it?
Oh, it certainly was, and all of us that live in the middle of the country will probably remember this past week. Before we get into the numbers, what does that mean for the cattle industry? Is logistical challenges of getting cattle, to processing plants, having the power at the plants, helping calves, being born. Parts of the country we were having, calf crop is starting and so forth. So really from mama cow all the way to harvest, we had some challenges this past week. Actually here in Kansas, we had a couple of AMS reports that didn't even print. So like Dodge City, did not call the market in Dodge City because there was limited trade and so forth. So a unique week to say the least.
Go over the numbers, if you would, on the cash and futures markets then.
Yep. So the AMS called cash fed cattle on light volume, by the way, 114. That'd be up just a little bit from the week before. When we compare that to the board, the April live cattle contract was up about 50 cents for the week, coming in about just under 124. Round that out with feeder cattle, and that's where it gets a little spottier. So as I said, AMS didn't call a Dodge City market. Pratt had very low volume, only a couple hundred head, actually in the 700 to 900 weight range. But I'll give us one lot for flavor. So 105 head weighing 839 pounds went for 138 in that AMS report. I think it's really important not to overreact to that because the volume was so low this past week. Doesn't mean much. On the board, March feeder cattle were down about $1.50, just under 140. What is a relevant update that did show up again in a challenge of converting cattle into meat again this past week is wholesale meat prices went up. This will be the third time we've seen a version of this going back to the Holcomb August 2019 challenge. Before I even give those numbers, economists like me have given lots of talk since August of 19. When we have those challenges, basically the derived demand for live cattle is depressed because we don't have the ability to process them like we want. And at the same time, the demand for wholesale beef goes up because we're offering fewer pounds, and some of those buyers get concerned about what the near-term supplies will be, so they're bidding up those pounds. Choice cutout came in at $239, up $7 for the week, and select was at about $228, up $8 for the week. I don't anticipate the processing challenges to last for long. I hope by the time this business week is over, that's in the rearview mirror. I do think it'll take a couple weeks to kind of catch up, so to speak, with the cattle. But I anticipate we'll have full daily runs most of this week.
Yeah. And you do keep regular track of the processing progress and the numbers, again, reflective of the interruptions of the weather.
Very much so. And they were the biggest driver of the markets this past week for sure. So the initial estimates from USDA were through Saturday, we had 552,000 head of cattle that would have been processed. That's down notably from 608,000 the week before, and down even more versus 626 the year before. And again, I think that's largely a power issue at the plants, logistical issue. Just some people can't get the diesel trucks to start. Yeah. Some people didn't want to stress the cattle by handling them. You add all that up. That led to a big hiccup. It was worse in the South, ironically. So, the Texas plants and so forth had, anecdotally had bigger challenges than, say, Nebraska. But nonetheless, it was a challenging week for all those states where we have large fed cattle populations.
USDA Cattle on Feed report out Friday, Glynn, and once more we see a surprising number on the placement side.
Yes, and that would be the only surprise. I'll give us the two non-surprises first. So the February 1st inventory came in up 1%, second highest on record, but not a surprise. The January marketings came in 6% down from the year before, right on par with what we were expecting, so not a surprise. The surprise, as you said, Eric, was the January placements. They came in 3% up from the year before. The trade was actually expecting basically flat. The highest expectation was for about a 1.5% increase. Kansas, Texas, and Nebraska all had large increases, 8% in Kansas, Texas actually 9%, Nebraska 4%. I think underneath that is a little bit of bullishness in the feedlot community. We'll talk here in a minute about my feedlot returns barometer, but there has been some improvement, at least going into this past week, on projections for feedlot margins, and I think that led to some folks chasing feeder cattle more than we might have anticipated a month earlier.
So it's really not indicative of a sudden boom in supply necessarily. It's simply a flow of the market, if you will.
I think it was more a flow of the market and a pull forward by the feed yards. But you raise a good point, is we certainly are still trying to figure out how many cattle are outside of feed yards. That is one of the metrics that we kind of have the most air on, because we only get a couple snapshots of that per year from USDA data. So it is possible there's just more cattle out there than we anticipated that were being placed. But I really think the biggest driver was we had improvement during the month of January in projected closeout margins, and I think that led to feedlots, quote-unquote, buying those feeder cattle, getting them into the yard.
Glynn, as you say, you've updated your feedlot return numbers for Kansas yards. The black ink is flowing, or could be flowing, as we roll through the spring and even summer, it looks.
Yeah, so most of our listeners know I do this monthly. You can find on my Ag Manager, dig into those details. These were dated as of February 12th. And importantly, that is before the most recent weather shock. Yeah. But if you compare that February 12th report with, the parallel one that was in the middle of January, there indeed was a $10 to $75 improvement, depending on the exact closeout month you'd be making comparison, consistent with what I just said on why I think January placements were up. Let's just pick a couple of examples. So for the month of April, the closeouts I have there are plus $54 per steer. You go all the way out to August, they're plus $30. The board has changed a little bit. It's off about $1.50 since then. So if I was to update those margins today, I would temper them a little bit, but they still would be better than what I put out in the middle of January. There's a lot of optimism that global beef demand is going to be part of the consumer resurgence to quote-unquote normal as we proceed through 2021. And with that, higher demand for fed cattle is baked into those numbers.
Now, you had occasion, Glynn, along with a couple of other colleagues, to talk as part of that USDA Agricultural Outlook Forum this past Friday, and a select topic here that you and your associates addressed. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so the theme actually of the broader USDA Ag Outlook Forum, which was a virtual event this year, was all around resilience in our food system. The specific session you're referring to is Lee Schultz at Iowa State. Our listeners hear him regularly. And Bill Hahn is an economist colleague now down the road at Kansas City with USDA ERS. And we were speaking to aspects about transparency and resiliency in the meat and livestock space. I shared some thoughts in the beef cattle space, Lee did on the pork and hog side, and Dr. Hahn did on the sheep side. To paraphrase, you can find the slides on Ag Manager, and I'm guessing the recording will be available via USDA's websites and so forth in the future. But I was pleading basically, which I've been doing for several months, to recognize that lots of the things being talked about in the industry are interconnected. I like to use the visual of a Rubik's Cube. So if we change one thing, we tend to change three others. So if we want to talk about altering the volume of cattle going through the spot market, that tends to potentially impact the signals for beef quality investment by producers and so forth. We want to talk about mandating certain things. That tends to have unintended consequences and so forth. I try to be careful saying I'm not for or against any policy, because that is accurate. But I had lots of words of caution. There's lots of unintended consequences of lots of the proposals that are floating around. And I was trying to give some context on that. The situation's ever evolving. We now have 20 years of mandatory price reporting history. We have a lot more data and information on this industry than we did before that. That's now mandatory and blessed by USDA. That's important to recognize. Every 5 years, there's kind of an update to that. So wholesale beef, we have information on that market that we certainly didn't have 20 years ago. which leads into some of the discussions we're having. I regularly on this broadcast talk about the cutout prices and fed cattle prices and so forth. And in many ways, we have more data and information to assess the markets than we did before. But there's always room to improve those systems, and I encourage that. But I was pleading with our listeners and those that write articles and so forth later to let data and information drive those efforts and not emotion. That's easy for me to say, but there's an awful lot of emotion floating around the country in general these days, and I was trying to be a calm word of wisdom in that front.
Yeah. And one of the things that you routinely bring up is the dedication to a free market, and that's what's in the balance here, basically.
Certainly some of the proposals would take away cattle buyer or cattle seller choice in certain cases and so forth. At least yours truly, Dr. Glynn Tonsor, to be clear here, has serious pause on doing that. At the root of my belief is markets do more good than harm. There is ways to improve market signals. I'm all for that. But when we start restricting and mandating things, there's times that make sense. There needs to be what economists call a big externality. The world is way worse off in aggregate because of that, and we can negate that negative effect by implementing some restrictions. Sometimes that makes sense. I'm imploring we use data and information to figure out if that's the situation versus tying the hands of, in this case, buyers and sellers of cattle with what I fear would be a lot of unintended consequences. Beef has a really good demand story because it's invested in genetics and feed quality and, a whole host of things that have improved beef itself, and consumers want it today because of that. And we need to be careful not to make changes that I would think are unintended that would put us backwards on that improvement front.
As Glynn says once more, his PowerPoint presentation is posted at agmanager.info right now if you'd like to see in more detail what he had to share at that USDA Agricultural Outlook Forum on that topic this past Friday. Glynn, as always, we appreciate your time and your comments. Thank you.
Thanks for having me on, Eric.
He's a livestock economist, K-State Research and Extension. Glynn Tonsor with us on this opening segment of Agriculture Today. Agricultural producers, landowners, and creditors, you have a partner in your legal and financial needs. Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services offers reliable, trusted information and guidance. Whether you need advice for ag credit concerns or are transitioning your operation to the next owner, Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services can assist you in making sound decisions for your business. To learn more, call 800-321-3276 or visit us online. Welcome back to Agriculture Today. You cow-calf producers have plenty on your respective plates during the calving season. The last extra thing you want to have to contend with is the threat of predation on your newborn calves. A recent edition of the Dr. J's Beef podcast, featuring K-State Beef Systems Specialist Jaymelynn Farney, got into that topic. Her guest, newly appointed wildlife specialist for K-State Research and Extension, Drew Ricketts. Drew and Jaymelynn had a good conversation about predator management for protecting cattle herds.
What kind of losses are experienced due to predators, Drew, for a cattle operation?
Well, there's some different sets of information that we can look to try and figure that out. But the most accurate one is probably the report from the National Ag Statistics that comes out every few years. And the most recent one is from 2015. And in that report, they estimate that about 11.1% of all calf losses to all cattle operations around the United States were from predators.
Yeah, so that's not an insignificant amount. That's something that we should be worrying about. Now, which of the predators are the most concerning? Not just in Kansas, but, around the country, as this podcast is kind of listened to in other states.
So if we look at the numbers for the entire United States, about half of the losses to predation of calves are associated with coyotes. So between 40 and 50% of that 11% that are lost to predation is due to coyotes.
Oh, wow. So, most of what we'll probably be talking about is related to coyotes. But one of the things that we really read in a lot of our popular press articles, especially your beef magazine ones, they say the best way to manage for predation is to calve in a secure location, i.e. barns or corrals that are close to your home base. However, that might not be practical for everyone, and especially for the entire calving season, depending on how long your calving season is. What are some ways that you can manage for predators? And maybe we can focus mostly on your coyotes, since that's our biggest predator right now. What is the way to manage for, say, coyotes?
Well, those cultural methods, like how we take care of our critters and things like that, are actually going to be the most effective ways. One thing that's really important beyond, calving close to home and things like that is hauling off dead cattle, hauling off dead calves, because those attract coyotes from a really long ways away. That's one of the things that I noticed when I was doing my PhD research on coyotes, where we had some GPS collared coyotes, and there was a big cattle operation close by. And then we also had some dead bison that happened during the study. And I was able to see very, very strong shifts, coyotes moving well over a mile out of their normal home range to come to those carcasses. And so getting rid of those dead cattle can be really important for reducing how many coyotes we have in an area.
And when you said home range, that just made me think about it. What is a typical home range for your coyote population?
It varies considerably depending on where you're at. An average territory or home range of the coyotes that I saw in my study, a good round number to put on it that's easy to think about would be about a square mile, a little more or a little less. And that's for a coyote that is territorial. There's a social hierarchy in coyotes, and basically the breeders, or the ones that are paired up, are what we call residents. They've established a territory and they keep sort of a reasonable home range. And then the rest of the population is what we call transients. And they're kind of floating around, making their living in the spaces in between or on the edges of the territories of the other coyotes. And they might have home ranges that are 10,000 acres, very, very, very large home ranges. And they're really not a territory the way we would think about animals having a territory. They're just kind of making a living where they can without getting their butt kicked.
And so is there any correlation between a lot of predation issues on your operation and those territorial animals, or the transit ones? I guess I'm asking, is one worse than the other?
We don't have a ton of information from coyotes, but there have been some studies that have looked at this with mountain lions, and I would expect that some of this would translate back to most predators that would be impacting a cattle operation. But the transients are typically going to prey more on those easy resources like cattle or calves. If we have a territorial animal, they know more about where the resources are in their home range, right? They're spending time there. And when we remove those territorial animals, sometimes we get a transient animal that comes in and takes their place that doesn't know where the resources are, and they can be much more likely to impact livestock operations than those residents. If we think about a coyote, most of their diet is mice, rabbits, things like that. They're not eating a lot of big stuff. And so if we have those residents that know where those resources are, then sometimes they're going to be a lot less likely to prey on calves and things like that than the transients would when they move in.
And so when you said that, that made me think about an old farmer I'd visited with. He had sheep, and for the longest time never had an issue. And then they started hunting some coyotes, and all of a sudden now they had just death every night. So is it worth it to go ahead and reduce your coyote population if you don't have an issue? Or do you wait till you have an issue and go after it?
If you don't have an issue, then I would say that recreational hunting is fine. If you enjoy hunting coyotes, if you enjoy trapping coyotes, if you do it for fur, those things, then keep doing that. But from a predator management standpoint, it really doesn't make a whole lot of sense to try and reduce, especially a coyote population. From the models that we have, the population models that are out there, they indicate that you would have to remove over 70% of the population every year for 50 years to actually eradicate coyotes from an area. That's because of that resident transient social structure that they have. Basically, for every coyote that's a resident that you remove, there's already another one waiting to take its place. And so it's really hard to affect population numbers of coyotes through predator control at a scale that most people can do it.
And so if you do think, or you're wanting to work on a little bit of predator management, when should you begin that process?
Well, the best time to do it, and this, I know this is a little counterintuitive, but the best time to work on predators is actually after you have an issue. So if you start losing calves to coyotes, then trapping and calling to remove those individuals that are actually causing the problem is typically, when you would want to do that.
Now, we're going to kind of talk a little bit now about laws in regards to management of predation. And, and that's going to be very state specific. But if you can give us maybe some overviews or some resources if people need to go and locate what you can or cannot do in regards to predation.
Yeah, each state will have their own regulations about how to deal with predators. Different states and even different federal agencies within different states will provide different resources in terms of assistance and those sorts of things. And so, some states, Wildlife Services, which is a branch of APHIS, which is a branch of USDA, actually does a lot of predator control work through contracts with the state agencies and things like that on it. It's typically going to be on a cost share basis. In Kansas, we don't have that. The predation management assistance in Kansas is me. We do it as an extension activity. If we have a producer that's losing calves or sheep or has a wildlife damage issue, then they can contact their extension agents or a specialist or Wildlife and Parks even, and then they will put you into contact with me, and I can come loan you the equipment to deal with that wildlife damage issue and also teach you how to do it on your own. And so we figure that through educating folks about how to deal with these problems, we can have a bigger impact than just having a couple of people who go out and trap and don't teach people how to do it later. As far as the laws, in Kansas, we have a state regulation and some statutes that say that as long as an animal is not protected by another regulation or not federally protected, that if they are damaging your property, which would include livestock, that you may remove that animal from the population. So with coyotes, we don't have much of an issue with that because we don't have a closed season on coyotes in Kansas, and just about any method to take besides toxicants would be legal. So you can't poison them, but through trapping or shooting or using snares, you can take care of your own problems with coyotes unless you're within the boundaries of a city or another municipality that would prevent you from doing that. As long as you are following your local laws about where you can discharge firearms and where you can set traps, then there's not a whole lot of regulations that you would have to worry about.
That's K-State wildlife specialist Drew Ricketts talking with K-State's Jaymelynn Farney. Further on in this podcast, by the way, they got into mountain lions as predator challenges for cattle producers here in Kansas. Hear that entire podcast by searching for Dr. J's Beef. We'll return with more after the break. This is Agriculture Today.
Did you know every Kansas farmer feeds 128 plus people?
Kansas farmers are hard workers, dependable, authentic, and sensitive.
Not only do farmers put food on your table, but they put clothes on your back and fuel in your car.
For more information about Kansas farmers, visit K-State Research and Extension online or stop by your local extension office. This message has been brought to you by the K-State Animal Sciences Leadership Academy participants.
Agriculture Today continues now here on the K-State Radio Network. Eric Atkinson with you, and time aside now for today's agricultural news headlines, courtesy in part of DTN. Well, the number of farms and ranches in Kansas declined during 2020. That's according to new numbers from the USDA's National Agricultural Statistics Service. The number of farms and ranches in the state at 58,300. That's down 200 farms from 2019. The number of farms and ranches in Kansas with less than $100,000 in agricultural sales decreased 200 farms from a year earlier. Operations then of agricultural sales of $100,000 or more were unchanged. Land in farms and ranches in the state totaling 45.7 million acres, unchanged from 2019, and the average size of operation, 784 acres, was up 3 acres from a year earlier, according to the USDA. There is no credible evidence of food or food packaging associated with or as a likely source of viral transmission of the virus causing COVID-19. That's according to a statement issued by acting USDA Secretary Kevin Shea and acting FDA Commissioner Janet Woodcock. While there are relatively few reports of the virus being detected on food and packaging, most studies focus primarily on the detection of the virus's genetic fingerprint rather than evidence of transmission of the virus resulting in human infection. According to that statement, they went on to say that given the number of virus particles that could be theoretically picked up by touching a surface would be very small and the amount needed for infection via oral inhalation very high, the chances of infection, they say, by touching the surface of food packaging or eating food is considered to be extremely low. Now, the agency said they were sharing that information based upon the best information from scientists around the globe, including a continued international consensus that the risk is exceedingly low for transmission of the virus to humans via food and food packaging. This comes as China has been maintaining that this could be a source of infection, and a World Health Organization team that investigated the situation in China indicated that further examination needs are whether frozen foods and the cold supply chain are possible transmission methods. Again, from that USDA Outlook Forum, the numbers make it clear the U.S. meat and poultry industries have made a remarkable recovery from the pandemic disruptions. The USDA's Gary Crawford has more.
2020, it was unprecedented, with COVID disrupting agriculture in so many ways, disrupting the markets for fruit and vegetable producers, for example.
And we also saw that and felt that on the livestock side and the meat market.
USDA economist Seneca Heron telling USDA's Outlook Forum that the livestock industry did take a huge hit for a while there, but
the livestock industry was able to pivot and turn things around, ramp things up.
So that U.S. meat and poultry production for 2020 ended up being 106.5 billion pounds.
And that was up from the previous year, which was a record.
And it looks like another big year in the making.
Total red meat and poultry production is forecast to increase 1% in 2021.
So we could be on the way to another record. But despite more output,
overall livestock prices are forecast higher.
6% higher for steers, 17% for hogs, and a 14% boost in broiler prices. Gary Crawford reporting for the U.S. Department of Agriculture.
Deere & Company has posted a forecast for strong year-over-year profit growth in the 2021 fiscal year, expressing an outlook for higher industry sales in agriculture as well as construction and forestry this year. Deere forecasting full-year net income of $4.6 billion to $5 billion. The net income in the 2020 fiscal year was $2.75 billion. Deere forecast full-year production and precision agriculture sales of $15.5 billion to $16.5 billion. The company's industry outlook sees the large agricultural sector improving by 15 to 20% year over year in the U.S. and in Canada. In what kind of financial shape is the U.S. farm economy? Here's another USDA perspective on that once more with Gary Crawford.
One of the many trends that agricultural economists look at to track how well or poorly the farm sector is doing is the number of bankruptcies.
And they actually fell in 2020 a little bit.
But USDA economist Carrie Litowski told the USDA's Outlook Forum that that could change this year with expected lower farm sector income, higher production expenses. She says that could lower the liquidity of many farmers, the amount of money they've got to operate their ready capital. And indeed,
the forecasts for 2021 are for lower liquidity, like working capital. We think that's going to fall. We think they're going to have more of their production is going to have to go to making debt payments and the debt service ratio.
But she says as far as the financial health overall of the farm sector in 2021,
it's pretty solid.
This is Gary Crawford reporting for the U.S. Department of Agriculture.
And a couple of notes for you right here. This is National FFA Week, and to celebrate that, local chapters all around Kansas, all 220 of them, will be conducting special activities during the week. So we'd ask you to show your support for whatever your Kansas FFA members have going on. Kansas FFA now 9,600 members strong. And again, the 108th Cattlemen's Day at Kansas State University will be a virtual format this year, and it is coming up a week from this Friday, March the 5th. Registration is free, and it'll be via Zoom, of course. More on participation in just a moment. With featured speakers, Dr. Jason Lusk, Jason Rumley, and Robert Norris will summarize how the pandemic has affected the U.S. beef industry from the producer and processor standpoint and beyond. Jason is from Purdue University, the head of the Agricultural Economics Department there, and Rumley and Norris are from the Radian Group. Other presentations that will take place during this virtual Cattlemen's Day. K-State's Sandy Johnson on reproductive technology, resources, and tools. And K-State's Liz Boyle will lead a discussion on the pandemic's effect on small Kansas beef and meat processors. At the end of the conference, organizers will lead a question and answer session. This will begin in the morning around 9:30. It'll continue until around noon with that Q&A part of the program. To register, you simply go to ksubeef.org and you'll find full details on the program and the registration process. Again, ksubeef.org. And don't forget as well that 44th Annual Legacy Bull and Female Sale. That'll take place in person at 4 o'clock at the Stanley Stout Center here on campus. If you'd like to learn more about the lots on sale at that event, asi.ksu.edu/legacy sale. asi.ksu.edu/legacy sale. We'll hand it on over to Jeff Wickman now for this week's 4-H segment next on Agriculture Today.
Did you eat today? Thank a farmer. A way to get more involved in agriculture is through 4-H and FFA. Through 4-H and FFA, we have been given multiple opportunities to grow as leaders and learn more about agriculture.
You can learn skills related to jobs, public speaking skills, and you get the opportunity to travel around the country and meet new people.
If you want more information about getting more involved in 4-H and FFA, visit them on their websites at kansasffa.org and kansas4h.org.
Welcome back, and thanks for joining us on Agriculture Today. Along with Eric Atkinson, I'm Jeff Wickman. Kansas 4-H youth are currently engaged in 4-H Day. That's an opportunity to use their communication skills to highlight projects they've been working on. Southeast Area Kansas 4-H Youth Development Specialist Beth Hinshaw says that 4-H Day features a variety of presentation possibilities. Beth, 4-H days have been going on and will continue to go on for the rest of this month and probably into early March. What are some of the things that take place during 4-H Day?
4-H Day is really an opportunity to highlight our young people and the communication skills that they have learned in 4-H. And so, when you go to 4-H Day, you would typically see project talks, demonstrations, illustrated talks, public speaking, all those kinds of things.
So these are things that they put together themselves, and do they memorize these? How does this work? Is this kind of free-flowing?
There's kind of a method, and we actually have really wonderful guide sheets on all of the different communication or public presentations that might happen at 4-H Day. So you can get the demonstration guide sheet off our web or illustrated talk. But, honestly, it's all about learning how to organize that information and then deliver it. And so while maybe young people would have a lot of it written out, maybe the first time they give a presentation, as they grow in that skill, they're going to get to the point where they probably are using an outline, and certainly they practice a lot. I have many memories of practicing over and over and over, to be ready for 4-H Day and to have your talk or your demonstration judged.
I imagine the earlier you start this, the better you are, because I think when you put off public speaking for a long time, it becomes a much more scary thing.
Yes, it is better just to tackle it. And some of the things that we think about is, the value of the presentation. You've heard a lot of us in 4-H talk about that spark, or, what is that project that young people just really love. And so, if they're going to use that project area for 4-H Day, or, there's other times during the year certainly that we give talks, demonstrations, and public speeches, they have a chance to really work on something that they're interested in. So, whatever that project spark is, they have a chance to really work on that. They have a chance to really dig in and learn some more information, and just really deepen their knowledge and understanding of the project. The other thing that we know is that when you take the time to prepare like that and do that kind of research and prepare your presentation, you're really learning more about that subject than you would have before.
And you're actually learning a career skill that's going to help you down the road when you start making presentations through school and other places.
Yes, and that is one thing that we just love about the communication skill in 4-H. And, lots of people will tell us, I would not have had the communication skills and the abilities that I have had I have not had my 4-H background, because it's just a natural and normal thing when you're in the 4-H program that we would have expectations that you'll learn how to do that, from the time you're young. But when you think about that, giving presentations in 4-H is going to teach members many, many skills that have a high value later in life. And so let's think about these things as, is this something that's necessary for college and career? How to organize thoughts in a logical manner, how to find information and research a subject, how to express ideas clearly and convincingly, how to prepare visuals and use them to support your presentation, how to listen to the opinions of others and accept feedback.
So that is something that will happen. They'll get some feedback?
Yes, that's exactly what happens. We have a judge that listens to their presentation, and then they let them know, hey, you did really well on this, and here's something that you need to work on. That's another resource that is available up on our website, and that is the scorecards for all of these different presentations. And so what is the expectation of the different presentations that young people are involved in?
I imagine this is going to be wide-ranging in terms of presentations, but what are some of the things that most likely occur during 4-H Day?
Lots of project talks. Those a lot of times are by our younger members, but they're also by older members as well. A project talk just tells about the project, so it's almost like show and tell, but we add some visuals in there as well usually. A demonstration allows young people to demonstrate and show how to do something. An illustrated talk, which is another option, it allows them to tell how to do something rather than show how to do something. And then public speaking, a lot of times we think of that as something to persuade or to inform, to entertain, or to inspire. So those are really a lot of the presentations that will be at your 4-H Day.
Is this something that they do individually, but it's also a club project?
Actually, most things that are done at 4-H Day, or most of those presentations, probably are individual. Talks, demonstrations, even public speeches could be a team talk or a team demonstration, but I would say the vast majority of those are individuals. Now, you brought up the club, and something that I would like to remind everybody is that oftentimes 4-H Day is not necessarily the first time you've ever given a presentation. Most of our 4-H clubs have that as part of the program every single month, where young people are giving presentations.
And this also might be a little bit different this year from some past 4-H days because there is some in-person, but there is also some virtual presentations as well.
Yes, certainly everything that's going on has made 4-H Day a little bit differently this year as well. And so there are some 4-H days across the state that will be happening in person, and we know that there are some as well that are going to be taking place virtually. A lot of years I would encourage you to find out when 4-H Day is and go as an audience member. This is probably not the year to do that. However, a number of our local extension units might be putting some of those up on their social media or might be putting those on their website. And if you have friends and family that are doing presentations, there's a good possibility that there's a video of that somewhere that they could share with you.
Well, as you mentioned, a great skill to learn and really a great learning process that they'll go through just to get ready for this 4-H day.
Most definitely. You know, the ultimate goal in any presentation experience, you know, whether it's a project talk, a demo, an illustrated talk, or public speech, it's for our members to complete the presentation with a good feeling about themselves and what they have accomplished and what they've learned.
That's Southeast Area Kansas 4-H Youth Development Specialist Beth Hinshaw with an update on 4-H Day. To learn more about Kansas 4-H, contact your local extension office or visit kansas4h.org. And that'll do it for this edition of Agriculture Today. For Eric Atkinson, I'm Jeff Wickman. This is the K-State Radio Network.